Stop for a moment, because what is happening around you on this 31st day is not as ordinary as it looks. The sky does not always announce a cycle ending with thunder. Sometimes it closes it with a hush that only you can hear. You have felt that hush in small ways already, and you have called it tiredness, confusion, or just another difficult week. But there is a deeper name for it, and this message will name it for you. You are not hearing a random devotion. You are hearing the edge of a cycle that has reached its appointed hour. It matters that you stayed long enough to listen, because the first thing that will change is the way you read what has been pressing against your chest. It will not all make sense at once, but it will begin to make sense. You have carried the feeling that something invisible was finishing, and you were right to pay attention. Even now, while your room stays the same and your phone glows in your hand, something in you knows the season has turned. The air around you can look unchanged, while the order beneath it has already moved. That is why the silence feels full instead of empty. It is why your spirit has been restless without needing a loud reason. You have not been imagining it. You have been sensing it. And by the end of this, you will know why the closing of this cycle does not come to shame you, but to gather you. You may have noticed that your body has been speaking before your thoughts could explain anything. Your shoulders have been carrying weight that does not belong to the day in front of you, and your breath has been stopping in places where it used to flow freely. There are moments when you sit on the edge of the bed, look at the wall, and feel as if the room itself has become too familiar with waiting. A glass on the table, a message left unread, the fan turning above you, the quiet after everyone has gone to sleep, all of it seems to say the same thing without words. The sentence in your chest is simple. I cannot keep carrying this the same way. You do not say it aloud, but your body says it for you. Your hands reach for the phone and then stop, because even the scrolling has started to feel thin. Your eyes move over familiar names, familiar places, familiar noise, and none of them fill the space that has opened inside you. That is not empty. Attention, you need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life. A guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you, and strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10 Zuru readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you who are tired of living in the fog. Ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment. Emptiness without meaning. That is attention being pulled away from what no longer feeds you. The old cycle wants you to call this boredom, so you will ignore it. The deeper truth is that your spirit is becoming too honest to survive on shallow movement. You are not weak because you feel the weight. You are sensitive because something is being sorted out, and when a cycle is closing, the body often knows before the mind is willing. That is why the ordinary things around you feel louder now, almost too loud. They are being measured against a change that has already begun. What is closing is not your calling. What is closing is the old arrangement that kept your calling buried under noise, timing, and pressure. You need to hear that plainly, because confusion often arrives dressed like spiritual realism. You were not made to survive by endlessly explaining yourself. You were made to recognize what remains when the explanations fall away. In the last days, you may have felt pulled between obedience and delay, between quiet conviction and the urge to manage everything by force. That tension is not random. It is showing you what kind of trust is being asked of you. By the end of this message, you will recognize the sign that the cycle has ended, the route that kept it spinning, the practice that steadies you, and the quiet declaration that belongs to you now. You will also see why the loss of certain comforts was not a curse, but a mercy. This is not about forcing a door. It is about noticing that one door has already stopped being yours to keep open. The thing that has exhausted you may not have been the work itself, but the strain of keeping the old order alive after its season had passed. There is a difference. One is labor, the other is resistance. The sky does not need to shout to tell you which one you have been living under. The day may look ordinary from the outside, but the ordinary has become the place where the signal is hiding. You may be rinsing a cup in the sink, tying a shoe near the door, folding a shirt that no longer feels like the person you are becoming, and all the while that inner pressure keeps tapping at your attention. The kitchen light, the hallway mirror, the parked car outside, the unfinished message on your screen, each one becomes a small witness to the same turning. You glance at them and feel a quiet mismatch between what still exists and what can no longer remain the center. That mismatch can feel uncomfortable because it breaks the habit of pretending. It is easier to keep saying everything is fine than to admit that your inner life has outgrown the room it is standing in. Yet the soul often reaches a point where denial becomes heavier than truth. You are there now, or near there. The air in the house, the rhythm of the phone, the sound of someone speaking from another room, all of it can feel slightly detached, as if the old script is being read by a voice that no longer fits. That is not you becoming dramatic. That is you becoming honest. There is a sacred discomfort in realizing that what once held you now feels too small. The old cycle does not end with applause. It ends with recognition. And recognition begins in places so plain that pride misses them. A sink, a chair, a late-night window, a half-finished reply. These are the places where the truth starts to surface. The sky is not only over your head, it is also reflected in the small rooms where you keep living. You have felt for some time that you do not fit the same way you used to fit, and you have probably wondered whether that means something is wrong with you. It does not. It means your discernment is maturing faster than your habits. The one who is being chosen in quiet ways often feels too much, notices too soon, and cannot easily return to sleep once the inner alarm has sounded. That can make you feel isolated, but it is not superiority. It is responsibility being born in you. You notice the pause in a conversation, the fatigue behind a smile, the mismatch between words and atmosphere, and you carry it home in your chest. A lighter person shrugs it off. You do not, because your spirit is learning how to weigh what others overlook. That is why the cycle ending at midnight matters to you more than it might matter to someone who lives only by noise. Midnight strips away distraction. Midnight leaves a room, a breath, and a truth. It is the hour when pretense is thin and the real thing stands up. You may have thought your sensitivity was the problem, but it is actually the instrument being tuned. What feels like heaviness is often the cost of seeing before the room is ready to admit what is there. The old role wants you to become harder, so you will stop noticing. The new path asks you to become clearer, so you will stop denying. You are not failing because the weight is visible now. You are finally seeing why the weight never belonged to you. A cycle can only end where honesty is allowed to stay in the room. The pressure around you has not only been emotional, it has also taken the shape of distraction, and distraction is often the quietest opponent. It does not always arrive with obvious evil. Sometimes it comes as 100 tiny urgencies, all asking to be answered before the one thing that matters can be heard. You open the phone, and 10 minutes disappear. You answer one concern, and 3 more grow in its place. You try to focus, and the mind keeps offering unfinished tasks as if they were destiny. That is how the old cycle keeps itself alive. It fills the day with lesser fires so the true fire can be ignored. You know the feeling of being busy and still unsettled. You know the difference between movement and direction. The body can be exhausted by noise long before it is exhausted by work. This is why the closing of the cycle is not merely a spiritual phrase, it is a practical mercy. Something in you has begun refusing shallow urgency. Something in you no longer wants to spend itself in every direction except the one that matters. That refusal can feel like restlessness, but it is often the first clean sign of return. The old pattern counts on you believing that every interruption deserves your full life. It does not. The sky closes certain cycles by making the false important enough to feel obvious. Once that happens, what is genuine can finally be seen against the clutter. Your task is not to panic. Your task is to stop calling every noise a necessity. You may remember a time when you thought delay meant absence, as if silence always meant refusal. Now that interpretation no longer holds. What has been silent is often what has been protecting you from settling for the wrong thing too soon. The story of Joseph, in the part where he waits through prison before the door opens, echoes here, not as a distant sermon, but as a mirror for your own long hallway of almosts. You have had days when the answer seemed near and then stepped back again, and that felt personal. Yet there is a wisdom in the back and forth that only becomes clear when the wrong timing is finally removed. A cup in your hand, a locked screen, a silent room after a long conversation. These are the small prisons where trust is formed. You may have whispered, "Why is this still happening?" and then felt ashamed for asking. Do not be ashamed. The question itself has been part of your forming. What looks like delay may have been the trimming of what could not survive the next room. If the door had opened too early, you would have entered carrying a burden that still needed to be laid down. The cycle ending at midnight is not a punishment. It is a mercy that keeps the wrong season from masquerading as the right one. You are being spared from a premature yes. You are being protected from a noisy yes. You are being taught to recognize the difference between being delayed and being preserved. And that difference will matter more than you know when the next threshold appears. If you ignore the signal, the cost is not dramatic at first. It is subtle, and that is why it is dangerous. You keep going the way you have been going, but with less peace and more strain. You begin to mistake survival for faithfulness and exhaustion for proof that you are doing enough. The old cycle prefers this because it can survive on your numbness. It survives when you stop noticing the ache. It survives when you keep saying yes to what empties you and no to what restores you. That is why the pressure in your chest is worth listening to. It is not there to terrify you. It is there to warn you that something inside has already reached its limit. A closed cycle often reveals itself by making old compromises unbearable. Things you once tolerated now feel sharp. Conversations you once endured now feel draining. Rooms you once entered without thought now leave you hollow. That is not you becoming difficult. That is your inner life refusing to continue under false terms. There is a consequence to pretending the signal is not there. You can stay inside the old arrangement longer than you should, but it will cost you clarity, sleep, and quiet confidence. The body keeps score when the soul is ignored. The soul keeps speaking when the body is weary. Between the two, the truth becomes hard to escape. So listen carefully now. The cycle does not need your panic. It needs your recognition. Recognition is the first clean break. It is the moment when the spell starts losing its hold. If even one of these signs has landed inside you, if your shoulders loosened, if your breathing changed, if the room suddenly felt less random and more addressed, type 888 in the comments. Do not treat that as a number only. Treat it as a small agreement that you are seeing what is being shown. 888 is a sign of overflow, a quiet confirmation that what has been pressing on you is not meaningless. It is a way of marking the moment when the inner witness says yes before the outer world catches up. Take a breath. Come back to me. What matters now is not the code itself, but the recognition it carries. If your hands are still on the edge of a decision, this is not the time to rush past the signal. This is the time to let it settle. The cycle is speaking in a language that does not need volume. Your part is to answer with attention. The very act of naming the sign begins to loosen the old spell of confusion. It tells your heart that it does not need to keep pretending. And once that happens, the deeper pattern becomes easier to see. You're not moving into a new performance. You are moving into a new honesty. The next layer is not louder, it is truer. And truth, once noticed, does not stay small. What sits beneath the noise is not simply a schedule problem or a bad week. It is the old need to control what cannot be controlled. That need has probably worn respectable clothes in your life. It may have looked like responsibility, preparation, or simply being the one who keeps things together. But beneath the decent language, there was fear. Fear of being caught unready. Fear of relying on what you cannot force. Fear that if you stop managing everything, something precious will disappear. You have carried that fear so long that it may have started sounding like wisdom. It is not wisdom. It is strain. It tightens the jaw, shortens the breath, and teaches the hands to stay busy even when the heart is tired. You have probably felt the impulse to over-explain yourself, to make every step understandable before you take it, as if clarity from others could replace peace within you. It cannot. The cycle ending now is exposing how much energy went into guarding a life that was never meant to be defended by panic. There is a hidden surrender waiting under the control. There is a softer obedience waiting under the fear. And because the cycle is closing, you are finally able to feel the difference. The old version of you wanted certainty before movement. The new one is learning to move with trust before certainty arrives. That is not recklessness. That is release. The pressure has been trying to teach you that control is not the same as safety. It never was. Your mind has probably argued with your spirit more than once lately. The mind says that what you feel is just fatigue, just stress, just a temporary low. The body answers with tension that will not dissolve, with sleep that does not fully restore, with the quiet urge to withdraw. The spirit recognizes the shape of the hour before the mind is ready to name it. That split can feel unsettling, especially when you're used to making sense of everything before you move. But not every warning comes wrapped in logic. Sometimes discernment arrives as a deep refusal to keep pretending. You might sit in a car after a conversation and feel the silence inside you say more than all the words you just heard. You might close the laptop and sense that the work in front of you is not the real issue. You might stand under a shower and realize the water is doing nothing for the heaviness sitting behind your eyes. That is the moment when the inner life is trying to tell you that something old no longer fits. You have asked, why does this feel heavier than it should? And the question itself has been part of your answer. The cycle is ending because your internal world has begun rejecting what once kept it numb. What used to pass as normal now feels like pressure. What used to pass as peace now feels like disappearance. That is not confusion. That is clarity beginning to separate itself from habit. Not every environment can follow you into the next season, and that truth can be painful because it touches people, routines, and familiar conversations. Some rooms are tired of your growth before you even notice the change in yourself. Some voices keep asking for the version of you that no longer exists. Some relationships survive only while you remain available in the old way, giving away your attention before you have checked your own peace. That does not mean you must become suspicious of everyone. It means you must become honest about what drains you. There are moments when you leave a table and feel your chest tighten as if you have carried home more than words. There are messages that look harmless but leave you scattered. There are patterns of giving that make you smaller every time you repeat them. This is where discernment becomes mercy. It teaches you that loyalty is not the same as participation in your own depletion. The cycle ending now may involve a quiet separation from what constantly pulls you back into old reflexes. That separation can feel lonely at first, because the familiar always knows how to sound like belonging. But the deeper belonging is not found in exhaustion. It is found in truth. You are not being asked to judge everyone. You are being asked to notice what keeps your life from breathing. That notice is not harsh, it is holy. The strategy of what has opposed you has been to keep you tired enough to stop questioning. It works by making lesser matters look urgent and by making central matters look too complicated to face. It turns your day into a series of small delays, each one harmless on its own, until the whole evening has gone and the thing that mattered most is still untouched. You know this pattern. You have lived it in long stretches of scrolling, in half-finished prayers, in conversations that circle the issue without ever landing on it. You have felt it in the strange fog that arrives right when you're about to choose. The fog is not always supernatural. Sometimes it is simply habit wearing a spiritual mask, but the result is the same. You are kept from crossing the line where clarity would begin. That is why the closing of the cycle feels both relieving and uncomfortable. Relief comes because the burden can finally be named. Uncomfortable comes because naming it makes avoidance harder. There is a point where the soul grows tired of being distracted from its own knowing. You may be nearing that point now. The old cycle tried to win by constant interruption. The new path begins by refusing to be interrupted by what never deserved your trust. Once you see the strategy, you stop glorifying the noise. You stop treating every detour as destiny. You begin to protect your attention as if it was sacred, because it is, and when attention returns, direction returns with it. There comes a point when you stop negotiating with what has already been revealed, and that point changes everything. You no longer ask the old question with the same hope, because you already know the answer has shifted. You no longer wait for permission from the thing that has kept you circling. You stand in the threshold, and your breathing changes there. The room may still be the same room, but your relationship to it is not. You have seen enough to know that the next step requires a different kind of courage, the kind that does not need applause. The old cycle fed on hesitation. It survived while you were still asking whether you were allowed to move on. But the moment of truth has a way of making that question less persuasive. You are not being forced. You are being clarified. What once looked like safety now looks like delay. What once looked like stability now looks like a holding pattern. That is why the threshold feels so real in the body. Your feet know before your thoughts do. Your shoulders know. Your breath knows. And somewhere beneath all of that, the spirit knows that a yes is becoming possible where only strain lived before. There is no shame in arriving late to your own freedom. There is only the grace of arriving. The cycle closes when you stop calling bondage normal. The door does not need your apology. It needs your readiness. Picture a lamp covered in a cloth in a room that has gone dim from neglect. For a long time, the cloth was not punishment. It was protection from dust, from wind, from the wrong hands, from the season that could not yet hold its light. You may have been like that lamp kept under cover while things in you were still forming in silence. The cover felt like delay, but it was also shelter. The room around you, with its table, its chair, its window and its evening quiet, did not know what it was keeping safe. Yet the light knew. Your own life has carried that hidden feeling, as if something in you was alive but not yet ready to be fully seen. That is why the closing of a cycle can feel less like ending and more like uncovering. The cloth was never the lamp. The cover was never the calling. You may have spent years interpreting concealment as loss when it was actually preparation. The old pattern told you that if you were hidden, you were forgotten. The truth says the opposite. Hiddenness can be a sign that what is inside is too valuable to be exposed before its time. The lamp in the room begins to matter differently once the cloth starts to move. You do not yet need the full brightness. You only need enough light to recognize what has been preserved. And that recognition changes your relationship to waiting. Waiting is no longer evidence of absence. It becomes evidence of protection. The cycle nearing midnight is like that cloth loosening at the edges, ready to be lifted. The cloth did not only cover the lamp, it also kept the room from knowing how much light was waiting underneath. That is the part opposition hates most. It cannot destroy what it cannot reach, so it tries to make the hidden life feel irrelevant. It whispers that if no one sees it, it must not matter. It tempts you to measure yourself by visibility instead of by fire. You may have felt that temptation in ordinary places, at your desk, in the mirror, in the silence after you have done all the right things and still felt unseen. But the covered lamp is not ashamed of its cover. It simply waits for the appointed hand. And when that hand comes, the room changes without drama. The chair is still the chair, the table is still the table, but shadow no longer owns the corner the way it did before. That is what the old cycle feared. It feared the moment when hidden light would begin to alter the room without asking permission from the room itself. You may be living that moment now in a quieter form. The thing that once seemed like a lack is becoming a source. The thing that once felt buried is beginning to breathe. The covered season was not wasted. It was storing a measure of light the room could not yet use. You are not being punished by concealment. You are being prepared for visibility that will not break you. The cycle ends when the cloth is no longer mistaken for the thing it covered. Now the lamp begins to move under the cloth, and that movement is how you know the covering is ending. It is not sudden fireworks. It is a small return of life. The kind you notice first in your breathing, then in your courage, then in the way your attention stops scattering. The room has not changed its furniture, but the shadow line is different. You notice the edge of the table more clearly. You notice the window in a way you had forgotten to. You notice that the same silence that once felt heavy now has room inside it. That is what happens when the buried thing starts to rise. It does not announce itself by becoming noisy. It announces itself by becoming undeniable. You may feel the urge to name it before you fully understand it, and that urge is good. Naming is part of moving. The seal loosens not because you forced it, but because the time has come for it to open. The old cycle wanted to keep the cloth in place, so the room would keep adjusting to darkness. The new moment refuses that arrangement. It lets in enough light for you to know where you stand, and once you know where you stand, you can stop negotiating with the dimness. The movement is gentle, but it is real. The lamp is no longer only a hidden possibility, it is becoming a witness, and witnesses do not remain covered forever. If the image of that covered lamp has found you, type the words "Eu vejo isso" in the comments. Let that phrase mark the moment when recognition crosses from your chest into your own record. Do not rush past what you know you are seeing. Come back to me after you type it. This is the paragraph where the metaphor reaches its turning point, because the light is not only waiting now, it is moving. What was hidden has begun to breathe, and that breath matters. You do not need to explain it to everyone in order for it to be true. You only need to agree with the truth that is already standing in you. Typing those words is a small act, but it is a real one. It says, you are no longer pretending the room is unchanged. It says the lamp matters. It says the covered thing is not dead. And from here, the story turns from hidden preparation into lived return. Keep listening, because the next layer is not about the cover. It is about the life that the cover was preserving. The room is about to be read differently. The light is about to be trusted. The cycle is ending, and the next movement is not performance. It is restoration. Restoration begins when you stop trying to earn what was always meant to be received with honesty. That is the quiet shift now. You are not performing your way into a new season. You are returning to a form of life that did not need constant strain to remain real. In the morning, when the house is still soft with silence, you can feel this in the way you reach for the phone less quickly. You can feel it in the pause before you answer what once owned your reflexes. The old urgency loses some of its attention. You need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life. A guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you, and strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10 Zuru readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you who are tired of living in the fog. Ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment.